So Brendan Burke is here. Who came last year to his lecture? Just the one. Did you? That's right. Well, that's why he was here. So he was gracious enough to say he would come back. We got all our schedules aligned, and finally he's back. So I think it's going to be a very exciting presentation. Brendan is a underwater archaeologist. I didn't even know that existed. I just love the idea that you could be like a shipwreck archaeologist and all that. So wonderful presentation. I hope we don't get too chilly in here. If in fact we do, I can shut the windows and all that. So never fear, we also have heaters. We've not gotten to that point yet, but we'll be good. All right, so everyone please help me welcome Brendan Burke here.
Thank you, Cindy. It's good to be back in Chincoteague. Can everybody hear me in the back? Good. Happy to be back here. This feels a little bit like home for me. Before I moved back to Virginia, for me, I spent about 14 years working at the St. Augustine Lighthouse and Maritime Museum in the oldest continuously occupied town, really, in the United States. So my heart really is with the NGO, the nonprofit world, and so supporting your museums. I appreciate the fact that you all are doing that tonight. Tell all your friends to make sure, because museums, like libraries, are sort of stewards of the community heartbeat and trust and soul. So the only way we support them is by keeping the door hinges warm and oiled. Tonight I'm going to tell you about what I do. I'm the state underwater archaeologist. I've been in this position for about 2.5 years right now, as of now, that is. I'm not the only one. My predecessor, John Broadwater, some of you may have heard about him or seen him or read his books. He was responsible for having excavated the shipwreck Betsy, which was one of the many ships that the British intentionally sank at the siege or Battle of Yorktown in 1781. During the 1980s, Dr. Broadwater was responsible for leading a team that cofferdammed the site, did this amazing excavation on it, and he's working on the final book for that. I mean, the reports are one thing, but a book to get the information out there is forthcoming, so keep an eye out for that. John also did little things like raising USS Monitor's turret and its engine. So seething with jealousy, I ran straight back home, and I've been very fortunate enough to work for the Virginia Department of Historic Resources for the past couple of years. I am not the only member of the team. Left here is Jill Schuler. She has not yet been to Chincoteague. She's a North Carolinian, half Canadian. We'll get her here one of these days. I came here in a professional capacity, thanks to Cindy, about almost 2 years ago. My then assistant, Patrick Boyle, who's now in the doctoral program at Texas A&M, he and I came out here one dark and stormy day to record a wreck on the beach for and with the National Wildlife Refuge. So we met with the park manager, went out there, and looked at this wreck that completely stumped us for like the first hour. When we saw this copper from the stem halfway back to the stern. And it took us a long time to figure out that was ice guarding. I've been in Florida for so long, I forgot that ice was in other things, in martinis and rum drinks. But that was a fantastic way to get back into the world of the Atlantic up here, the Mid-Atlantic, and of course the world of the Chesapeake, which is near and dear to my heart. Tonight we're going to go on sort of a rambling voyage that includes everything from shipwrecks to mills. Because while shipwrecks are awesome and fantastic to study, boats usually die a different way than wrecking. And it doesn't mean they're any more or less important in that manner of disposal or disuse or abandonment or wrecking. It just means the story is different, and the cultural data to us as archaeologists is just as often as important as the thing, if not more important than the thing. No, we're not treasure hunters. Gold just gets us in trouble. It's really the story. And it's a shared story. So I'm here to share lots of stories with you. I'm assuming most of you have heard of DHR. We're responsible for placing many of the all of the highway markers that are state highway markers. There's about 2,500 of them around. In fact, one got placed this morning, and the governor was there. But we do a little bit of everything from historic districts, where you have a whole bunch of old things that get conglomerated into a district for preservation, the tax credits, grants, highway markers, and most fun of all, underwater archaeology. So I'm the guy that when something falls in the water, they point to me and say, get in it. It's usually when the water's really cold. I started off as an air-breathing, land-walking archaeologist and realized that human beings have a really unique thing. We all kind of share a little bit of it, some more than others, which is the sense that when you throw something or put something into the water, it vanishes, it's gone, it disappears. It is no more. And of course, we know that's not true, but in our minds, we still think that, no matter how much we know it's not true. And so I struggle with that kind of on a daily basis professionally, because everything we find as an archaeologist in this thing, most of what we find is in or under the water. People are always amazed, how could that thing be there? It's like, well, same as in dirt, it gets covered up, right? In fact, often the preservation is better for maritime sites than it is for terrestrial sites. I have smelled smells from the American Revolution that have been locked inside of artifacts since January of 1783 that were, I don't know, 2/3 of a mile off the beach of Florida. I have heard a sound that had not been heard since the American Revolution, the peal of a bell, a ship's bell that had not been struck or rung since it wrecked in January of 1783. And we've even seen paper and held sailcloth that pushed that ship and contained information for its peoples. And of course, doing archaeology takes us to a lot of cool places, both in the field, presenting things, as I'm doing tonight, meeting you all, but also into the archives. That's often as much fun as pulling the trowel back or the suction dredge or seeing something diving or just walking a creek in the water and discovering it for the first time. Finding that document that puts all the pieces together, tells you the name of the person or the time that the thing happened, it gives you that last little fact. So my job is really to inventory underwater and maritime sites around the state. I'm tasked by the Code of Virginia with doing that as part of DHR's mission. Now, the state has, we'll talk a little bit about Virginia's maritime world. And you see that I've already begun the shift from underwater to maritime, because that's an important junction that we should pause momentarily to understand. Maritime is not just the sea, mar, right? But it's all of our interconnected networks that rely on water, floating, boats. It can include inland canal networks, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the James River and Kanawha Canal. You know, if you tell a guy that, or somebody that works on a freighter in the Great Lakes that they are not maritime, you'll probably get slugged. But Virginia is about has about 2.14 million acres of submerged bottomland. Some of them are right over there. And then I drove across 26 miles of them to get to the eastern shore. And then they go all the way up the James, Appomattox, York, Rappahannock, all of our rivers, as far as the Clinch River, as far as the Cumberland Gap. We have things that are maritime. As long as humans have trod the earth, they've had to ford, cross streams, find another way to get there than swimming or drowning. And they've left a maritime trace wherever they've gone. In fact, it's one of the things that kind of conspires to unite us more than anything else, is even if you're from Kansas, chances are you've got some maritime connection. You're in the high Andes, you still have some maritime connection in your family. So I think that's pretty cool. We're a little under 8% submerged as a state. You know, no one would want their house to be 8% submerged. That would be considerate. So I think it's considerable that the state has that much submerged land. 64 rivers, including the Slate and all the other little rivers you've never heard of, about 2,500 miles of river. And then 85% roughly of state-owned lands are underwater. That does not include military reservations. So these are facts that I thought I knew when I started this job, and when I did the research, all those numbers ran way up. So that's where we are. I want to tout the other, I've told you about Dr. Broadwater, but I want to tell you about Dr. Bill Trout. If you have not seen or possessed any of these river atlases, now I feel a little bit weird because we're here on Chincoteague, we're here on the eastern shore, but for the rest of the Commonwealth and its river history, Dr. Trout did I think it's 18 different river atlases, maybe 14 of which are Virginia rivers, that are wonderful guides. You know, if you want to drive up the Maury one day or up the James or spend a couple days on the Rappahannock, These are wonderful encyclopedic maps and contextualizations that you can hold in your lap to get more out of the landscape, and we all like to do that. So I always like to say, if you're interested in Virginia maritime, it's not just the Atlantic and the shipwrecks in the bay. That's super important, but it's also our inland maritime story too. I've been doing a lot of inland maritime stuff for the past 2 years. Why? Don't yet have that boat. So where I go where my boat can take me, and right now that's kayak. I occasionally borrow a boat from Vim's, go out with buddies and whatnot. We're working on that. These are the main drainages in Virginia. And as we know, political boundaries are just what they are. They're lines on maps that we either adhere to or are aware of. And so if you're a raindrop that doesn't care about political boundaries, you can fall in Virginia and end up in going by, Georgetown, South Carolina, where the Waccamaw River flows into the Atlantic. You can fall in the Clinch River drainage and end up going by New Orleans eventually. Having gone through the Ohio drainage and into the Mississippi. And of course, you can fall into any number of the drainages for the Roanoke River or the Great Chesapeake Bay drainage itself. About 10% of the state or so lives in the James River drainage, which is kind of one of our largest and best known. This is the siren song that wooed me back to Virginia professionally. I was born here, raised here, couldn't wait to get back. But this little wreck in downtown Suffolk is a Chesapeake Bay bug-eye. And I assume that because we're on the eastern shore, everybody here can tell a brogan from a bug-eye and a pinky from a pungy. Well, this is a bug-eye. That's, or at least the bottom eighth of it. And this is a craft that's unique to the Chesapeake Bay. Chincoteague was lousy with them from about 1860 all the way up probably to realistically the 1930s, maybe the latest ones. And they were primarily oystering vessels. But what do when there ain't no oysters? You haul other people's stuff. Firewood, potatoes, here on the eastern shore, any level of truck to take it over to the other side, the other side of the bay, or just up and down, or take it up to Baltimore. And so these are all over the place. In fact, there's a couple of them here on the eastern shore that we've been working with, and I'll show you later. So I came up as part of a grant-funded project with the lighthouse, documented this thing, rescued a cat on the banks of the Nansemond, brought my wife up, showed all this stuff. We had a great time. We documented this. It was a team of 5 of us that worked together. Really cool style of boat, and that sealed the deal. So I got my feet wet in Virginia. Been here ever since.
What do you call that kind of boat again?
A bug-eye.
A bug-eye.
B-U-G-E-Y-E. Just like, and no one actually knows. If you read the authoritative tome that M.V. Brewington did on bug-eyes, pungies, and schooners today, no one really knows exactly how that name came about. Some people thought because it had fairly full bows, it was kind of bug-eye. There's lots of different anecdotes about that. I'll leave for you to sleuth out. The next place I came was here, well, not here, down there and over there on Paramore Island, or Parmore Island. This is the wreck of the Esk. So I came up here to tag that with tracking timbers, tracking tags, which it still has on it. Has anybody been out there to see that wreck? It's one of our larger wrecks in the state. When I say larger, it's not the largest by any stretch, but it's one you can walk to rather than having to swim to. This was a Canadian-built lumber schooner that ended up wrecking on Paramore Island in the 1880s. And you can see various aerial images of it. And I've been told back in the 50s the thing was almost intact. It still had hull planking on it, and it is rapidly coming apart. And because this joke made a lot more sense where I used to work, because things all end up in Florida as they age. Things here with littoral drift move down the beach. And so we've been tagging these so we can track them as they move down the beach. And we have indeed seen one timber, maybe not from the Esk, in fact it was not from the Esk, that was tagged right over there, ended up on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We interrogate the waters wherever they can go. There was an old British general that said, where a goat can walk, so can a man, and where a man can walk, he can drag a cannon. My thought is, well, I used to run a research vessel that took 5.5 feet of water, so we can go anywhere near land with our sonar. But now we've got this little craft here, and here I am in the New River, ironically named, because it's the world's oldest surviving river. looking at drowned sections of rivers where we have built dams and drowned those rivers and maybe flooded things like old Indian fish dams, foundations, old fords, and things like that. So I like to, when anyone says you can't do it, I look at Jill and she's like, how are we going to do it? So here we are. We even did a survey in a pond right beside the James River looking for a torpedo factory from the Civil War. This was a place where both sides, the Confederates and the Union Army, assembled what we would call mines, but they called them torpedoes at the time. Is that the mosquito killer?
Yeah.
All right. Is that the platform? And so we looked to try to find, based on pictures taken at the time, where this torpedo factory was. And it turns out it was probably underneath the pond. And they said, well, can't do anything about that. And I said, hold on a second, I'll be back tomorrow with our sonar. And so we sonared the pond and didn't come up with anything super conclusive, but the landform does look right, and they're going to actually drain the pond like maybe next year or so. We'll go back and take a look. So we've actually used sonar there for that. Recent project that we just completed, I don't have all the final imagery. This was thrilling back in June. We went up, everybody knows where the Pamunkey River is? Northeast of Richmond. So we know where Richmond is in the center of the state. Northeast of there, squished between, where we were was squished between Ukiah and King William County. When Little Mac, General McClellan, attempted to take Richmond in 1862, he mobilized the Army, I think it was the Army of the Potomac, in its largest mobilization to date, and sailed up the entrance of the Chesapeake, or up the entrance of the James River and into the Pamunkey River, and made a landing, which at the time was probably the most active port in the world, called the White House. Not used to those things. And so this is where the entire Union Army got off boats with their cannons, their mules, their feed, their fodder, their everything, and began what we now know as the 7 Days Campaign. As armies do, they tend to leave more behind than they pick up and take with them. And so we went back and found a whole bunch of these canal boats that had been left in the hurry to get out of there. And that is probably one of the largest collection of Schuylkill canal boat examples anywhere in the world. There's probably more surviving Schuylkill canal boats in Virginia than in Pennsylvania. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And one thing, I was looking at this picture, there's lots of pictures, Library of Congress, you can really kind of nerd out on these things. I thought was fun is that this is an artillery wharf, taking trees, Lincoln Log style, look like a big thing. They're unloading artillery there. So multiple tons going across this. If you zoom in right here, that's the oldest picture of a shipwreck in Virginia. This is June of 1862. What did the engineers do? They'd done the same thing I would have done at the time. They found a hard spot in the river, which was an old, probably a colonial vessel that had ended its days there at White House, where George Washington's wife, I believe, was born. And they used that hard spot in the mud to put their timber on. So there's actually one surviving structure in the foreground of another similar picture. So we can triangulate right to that and go find this wreck. Jill and I joined a team of volunteers for a day. As we know, volunteers are often some of the most dedicated, go-get-em folks that are out there because they're driven by passion. And so we were on a boat filled with people with passion, but also this thing here. It's on its side right now. That's a foot. There's a foot. There'll be another foot over here. That's a sector scanning sonar. This is most often used for boring things that save your life, like inspecting bridges to make sure that the columns go actually all the way down to the mud. Sometimes they don't. And so these are lowered down and they can inspect infrastructure. They're also used for finding bodies, for search and recovery. And then us archaeologists borrow them and take them out and put them in the Pamunkey and document. This is actually in the Chickahominy River. And my friend Brian Abbott has fed us all these images. This is actually, who here knew that Virginia had the largest navy during the American Revolution? Continental Navy, that is. And so a lot of that, not all of that, a lot of that, or a substantial portion of that navy was built on the Chickahominy River. We know where that is, just east of Richmond. It's a major tributary of the James. And so the Chickahominy shipyard, which then Governor Jefferson ordered to be set up. They built a lot of stuff, including canal boats and ships of war. These weren't big 44-gun behemoths that the Royal Navy was sending over. They were even more important. They were smaller, very deft gunboats that could navigate the shoals of the eastern shore and the shoals of the Rappahannock. And they could hide at night and go out and prey and predate upon royal forces. And we're actually fairly successful at doing so. And this is one, you can see the keel right there, and all of these cross timbers are what we call ribs, but us nerds call them frames. And so that is a wreck, and it's on top of another wreck right here. Those are the two surviving vessels from the Chickahominy shipyard. They were burned by Benedict Arnold, feel free to boo and hiss, on his raid to Richmond in 1780. Here's a zoomed in image of that. You can actually see the frames right there and some of the curvature. This vessel is turned turtle. It probably burned, settled, and then kind of fell down the bank line because the bank is very steep. You go from like 0 feet here to about 40 feet there. And those are big fish. This is one of those Schuylkill canal boats. And I remember specifically, pardon the image here, this is a picture of a computer screen. I hate showing these, but I didn't have the parent image here. There's actually two wrecks here. There's probably a barge right here underneath. And then this 93 foot or 83 foot long canal barge, we put the sonar here, there, and there. And then we're done. And I said, could we carefully put on the inside and shoot the inside? He says, I don't know if you can. We dropped it, and bingo, we got it right on the inside of the stern. In fact, you can see the rudder post standing up right there. That's its shadow. And got this beautiful image looking straight down that canal boat. While we were there on the Pamunkey River, that led me to another story. I told you we were going to ramble. The American Revolution takes us, if you study it, it takes you to all sorts of places your teachers forgot to tell you about. And one of those places was known as Little Page's Wharf on the Pamunkey. It's now known as Cumberland Landing. And once again, the Union Army stayed there. 110,000 men were camping out there for, I don't know, a number of weeks, a couple weeks during 1862. But if we go back to the American Revolution, who helped us in a big way during the Revolution? France. And so the Admiral Comte de Gras brought up lots of things: big ships, siege guns, military know-how, powder, shot, all of that. And he brought a lot of bronze guns with him. A number of these guns were unloaded at Little Page's Wharf. These are, I think that's an 18-pounder. So it shoots an 18-pound ball, cast out of bronze. This one here was cast in 1673, so it was a little old, even by Revolutionary War standards, but it still shot. Voice of an Angry King is the translation from French of its little motto. Another one was Don't Tempt the King. And they unloaded these guns there at Little Page's Wharf with the intent that we would use them, that the French would deliver them to a place where we could use them. We did not, for whatever reason, use them. And so they stayed there, and the French came back to collect them at the end of the war, with the cessation of hostilities, and loading them back onto a ship. One of them fell into the river, about 35 feet deep right there. They weren't big on diving and salvage then, and as militaries are prone to do, they said, you know what, we got most of it. Let's pack it out. And so they took most of it and left. 1808, a guy that was enslaved there at Little Page's Wharf during the Revolution remembered as an old man, remembered that as a young boy, seeing this cannon splash in the river. Word has a way of getting out about these sorts of things, and next thing you know, Virginia's first salvage law is challenged, and a guy comes down with his little schooner and a diving bell, and lowers the diving bell into the Chickahominy, and into the Pamunkey. They find the gun, tie a rope to it, bring their diving bell up, pick the gun up, put it on board their ship. The sheriff sends a guy down there and says, you can't do that, because that belongs to either France or the Commonwealth, but most decidedly not you. And the guy said, well, possession is 9/10 of the law, and I'm heading out of here going back up to New York. And so the sheriff says, all right, go ahead and sail away. A horse is faster than a ship. So the sheriff sent a deputy with reeking haste to Yorktown, where the customs house still is. And knowing that salvage vessel, Virginia's first, was going to have to clear out customs there to leave the Commonwealth. Guess who was waiting in the customs office when Captain goes in to clear out? That became our first salvage case. A colleague said, if you want to see those other guns, not all of them left the state. And so this is on the parapet at Virginia Military Institute. They've got a really good collection of late 17th century French ordnance. So you can go see the brother guns. We don't know what happened to that gun that came out of Pamunkey. Most of the other ones that stayed here in the state were melted down during the Civil War to make other ordnance. Y'all might remember up in big city of Alexandria a few years ago, a number of shipwrecks were found, building a hotel and a mixed-use project. This is an image I borrowed from CNN. All of those timbers have to be preserved. You can't just let wood like that dry out for good. It will get destroyed. And so the city archaeological team and archaeologist Dr. Eleanor Breen hatched what I thought was a pretty cool plan of ponding. Now the Navy knows about it. They've been ponding for years, because if you build wooden ships, you need to have wood on hand. And it better not be dry when you put live oak through a sawmill, because you'll stop whatever your power source is. And so they decided to store all these shipwreck timbers in a pond. So they put them out there in these sort of rectangles, each labeled, tagged, and carefully positioned by teams of divers, but they didn't actually have a map of their stuff. And as we know, if you don't have a map of your stuff, how can you possibly manage it or pretend to own it? And so we went out with our little sonar, once again in my kayak, I call it over-the-counter sonar. Went out and did a little map. This is a preliminary image from that. But that was the first time they'd actually seen their storage. So not archaeology, but it's archaeological stewardship. All right. So we're at Scarborough Neck. Y'all know where that is? You go down to Exmoor, stop and have lunch at the diner, then take a right, you head out to Scarborough Neck. If you're on the south side of that, you're in Occohannock. But on what would be the northwest point there, there's a tiny little cove, little indentation there, called Bull Cove. And in Bull Cove, you're looking at Bull Cove right there, wanders around Bull Cove Creek comes up in here. Well, Bull Cove Creek had been very well behaved up until about 4 or 5 years, 6 or 7 years ago actually. And it decided to punch a brand new inlet through this little fordun right here. And so where the creek used to go out and meander out into the bay there, now it's coming right out here. And it did a better excavation than I could ever hope to do on this bug eye. Now this bug eye looks different. If you remember back to slide number 32, that bug eye was cross-plank. Or not cross-plank, but had regular ribs built conventional style. And this one has what we here in the Chesapeake Bay know all about, has a log bottom boats. So if you go up to Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, who here has been there? You haven't? Get yourself there, great spot. And check out, they have a log bottom bug eye there, not the Parks, Rosie Parks, she's a skipjack. Daggone, will come to me in a minute. Anyway, ask for the bug eye. And I think she's hauled out right now on the rail, so you can see the bottom. But they were chunk built out of giant pines that grew here on the eastern shore and on the western shore of the bay. And these things would be pinned together with iron pins. They would hack out the inside to make a concavity. They'd flip them over and hack out the other side to make a convexity. And then that's the bottom of the boat. Then you put in some half frames and start putting some regular planks up, come up to the sheer, throw a deck on that thing, jot 2 masts in it, cut a hole in the center for your center board, and there's your bug eye. They ranged between about 44 feet, would be a very small one, up to 81 feet, I think was the largest registered bug eye. But this is somewhat of a rarity because we often find pieces of them, but not the whole hull. And we often find, when we do infrequently find the whole hull, it's usually in 10 or 50 feet of water. And you got to spend a lot of money and time diving on that thing and no visibility. And here we are, nothing's more than knee deep. And so we've been able to document that vessel. When one of my colleagues first saw this before I worked for the department, only that piece right there was exposed in the sand. That was it. And today, that whole piece is now over here, or at least it was about a month and a half ago. So it's coming apart. It's setting sail again. It's deconstructing itself. We have tagged it, hopefully with the idea that the tags may be found, read, and reported. but also we're able to document that vessel and hope to, at some point, reveal its identity. We don't have that quite yet. So there's the boat right there. And there's, you can see the sand plume. It's a very active, there's the old channel coming down through here. The folks that own that house have been super kind by allowing us access to the site, both landowners here. And there, we park there, we walk here. And they have a continuous memory back to the 50s of this place and had no idea that was there. They'd never seen that inlet form. That tells you how relatively young that vessel was when it came aground there, which probably indicates a wreck rather than abandonment. Here's the site plan of it when we first recorded it in, this would have been 2021, late 2021, I think. Should throw a date on there. And since then, all of this has become exposed. Like I said, that's called a wing log. Your outermost logs, one of those wing logs, the port wing log, has gone for sale. This is probably the most ungainly, ugliest vessel I've ever had the pleasure to sail aboard or be a propellant of. But this was a vessel that was built by some colleagues of mine, both former fuel school students of mine from Florida. Now, he's off working with Search and is a professional, and Natalie there is a professional archaeologist at Jamestown. Not many people go to Jamestown and get duckweeds all over them, but we did. There were, basically it was a tripartite team. DHR assisted Jamestown, whose project this was, and Search came in and brought all the tech. And so we put this thing as a sub-bottom profiler. Original name. You can profile the bottom and what's below it. And so this uses a very low frequency acoustic energy to see where you've got density layers that are different from each other. Ideally hoping to find things like timbers or iron cannon, something that's different than the mud, sand, or silt around it. And so this thing is used to being dragged in the ocean or in rivers. Here we are in the pitch and tar swamp. It is thought that somewhere in this picture here is a segment of the oldest road in Virginia, maybe one of the oldest European roads in the United States. It was the Great Road. And that was the road that literally left from Jamestown Island and went out across the island and the thoroughfare and would have ended up connecting through the central part of what was then known as Senecomica, the native name for Eastern Virginia. And so what we're looking for there is what happens to a road when there's a lot of traffic on it, a dirt path. It gets compacted, right? You change the density layer. You put some sediment on that. And through the change in river or sea and river level and all sorts of other stuff, this area here used to be dry. The areas that I used to park when I was at William & Mary and go visit friends that worked at Jamestown, it was dry field. Now it would be water halfway up the hubcaps. So we put the sub-bottom profiler in there. I don't know yet if we actually found it because the data hadn't all been processed, but indications look good that we may have actually found a segment of that road.
Does it work like LODAR?
It's kind of similar to LiDAR. LiDAR uses lasers. That would be horrible. It uses lasers. And actually, I'll show you some LiDAR data here because I use LiDAR frequently.
All right.
Archaeologists tend to use whatever tool is available to them to get the job done, right? By all means necessary. Another place we don't expect to find ourselves is inside of stone barns. This is a really cool barn at a place called Upper Bremo on the James River, built in 1820 as a practice masonry project for General Hartfield Cox's enslaved laborers that were learning to become masons. The clockworks on the inside, I'm told, was given to the Koch family by, we've heard a guy named Lafayette. You all agree on that? The Lafayette gave him, he said he had such a lovely barn, it needed a cupola and a bell and a clock so that everybody could keep time. And so it came from. I got a call from a now colleague who's doing her doctoral dissertation in the history program at Harvard on the enslaved labor landscape of the James River and Kanawha Canal. And she has a personal connection to that because her ancestors were enslaved here and they worked on the canal and did a lot of things in the James. And it's amazing how liberating the water can be. We've all felt that just getting onto a boat and untying. A friend of mine that was in the Navy for years said his favorite words were "take in all lines." That was his Liberty wasn't going ashore, it was getting out to sea. We've known for years that convicts love hopping aboard a ship and getting away from whatever trial and travesty awaited them back home. And so the same was true along every canal and waterway where you had hired men operating boats. In the 19th and 18th century, they were often enslaved, and that meant they got to see a broader world and learn it with particular skill set and knowledge that could be used to their own advantage and their community's own advantage. In the mill pond there at Upper Bremo, this boat came out in 2019. Now the guy that pulled this out told me, he said, Brendan, he said, you could have, until we put the straps on it, sprung a plank there, he said, you could have taken it, turned it over, bailed it out, and paddled it around. 19.5 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. This was a plantation skiff. This is the John boat of the 19th century. One time, a complete yawner of a boat. And in some ways still is, except the fact that very few of these, almost none of them survive intact. So we got a call and found it in this sort of state of decay, unfortunately, but nonetheless, its original surfaces and most of its dimensions are there for us to capture, and where we have a little piece and a pattern, we can extract and make the whole thing again. So we're going to be working with UVA in December of this year to basically flip it right side up, kind of jigger it back into position, reassemble it, so to speak, and then laser scan it to be able to digitally preserve that. It's the only boat I know of. Check out the dovetail joinery. I've seen a lot of types of joinery in shipbuilding, but never dovetail before. So it gives you an idea, probably built there on the plantation at Upper Bremo, and probably by a cabinet maker or a carpenter, somebody that knew how to do dovetails. Because let me tell you what, these are full-length planks. All these, and these side planks right there, if you screw up one of those dovetails, you get to shorten the whole boat. Or find another 20-foot plank with no knots in it. Little dumb boats. Here's another little dumb boat. But they're not, they're little, but they're not dumb. They are boats. This is the only surviving Shenandoah ferry that I'm aware of. This is in the Maury River, which up until 1949 was known as the North River. This is in downtown Lexington. If you read it phonetically, it's Jordan's Point, but if you pronounce it properly, it's Jordan's Point. This is, who's heard of the Great Wagon Road? All right, one person. Who's been on Interstate 81? It's the Great Wagon Road. It's the same thing. 81 superseded 11. 11 superseded the Great Wagon Road, which superseded indigenous trails that basically connected central and eastern Pennsylvania with the Atlanta area, so North Georgia. An interregional area. This area got intermodal because you had these big timbers that supported one of the old covered wagon or covered bridges there for the wagon road. And this poor little boat got washed probably by a flood or a freshet down and bumped into that bridge timber, which was just above a dam that survived until 2019. And in 2019, that dam was removed, been deemed a safety hazard. And of course, what happens when we take out the dam? All those things that people had thrown into the river that they swore would never ever exist again are revealed, right? The truth shall out. And so with the water down and clear, went up, and sure enough, one of my colleagues, I won't name him, was standing almost on top of this thing. And I said, hey, I said, check out the boat. And he's like, where? And I was like, it's about to bite you. And he goes, holy cow, here's this boat. So we documented this little thing, but it's got ring bolts in, let's see, got ring bolts in it right here. And we check on that annually to make sure our little Shenandoah ferry is all right there. We've documented that well enough to know that if we want to, not repair it, but reconstruct it, we have all the information to do that. But it's actually quite in a good place of stasis there. It's not going anywhere. It's got tongue and groove on the floorboards, on the outer planks. Again, just like the Upper Bremo boat, indications of who built it. Probably a valley carpenter or a joiner, somebody that did a lot of molding and had molding planes. Rivanna River, another little utility boat here. There are the ribs, there are the planks, there's the bank, and this is where one of the major canals bypassed Union Mills on the Rivanna River. They're not too far from Palmyra. And this is just below Richmond. This is what I believe is probably an older ferry. And, you know, I came here today on the bridge tunnel complex, but, you know, 50 years ago, I would have had to take, what was it, the Princess Anne? Was that the ferry, the big high-speed ferry that crossed back and forth? I think it was the Princess Anne, or if I was unfortunate, one of the slow boats back and forth. It would have taken me a lot longer. They're real cool, but a lot of them are still actually around in pieces. That big steel Princess Anne is off Florida as a dive site now. But this is probably one of the old VDOT ferries. Unfortunately, their records are really good in some places and not in others. So I was able to find some corollary imagery for construction details that kind of narrowed this down. We do things that aren't boats. We do things that are in rivers, though, and certainly this dam is mostly underwater now. This is the Ty River Dam. That was a major part of feeding water out of the James River into the James River Kanawha Canal. You got to have water in the canal. Where do you get it? From your adjacent waterway, the James River. That's James River State Park. It's a beautiful resource that's still there, and really a testament to the sheer labor and perseverance that went into building these monumental structures throughout the Commonwealth. This is one of those monumental structures, and I did not expect ever in my career to be doing maritime archaeology deep inside the Blue Ridge. And when I mean inside the Blue Ridge, I don't mean in Luray. I mean inside the mountain. The Great Central Waterline was what we called it in the 1870s. The canal is what George Washington called it in the 1790s. It was the way that we were going to pay off our war debts. It was the way that we were going to connect all of these veterans from the French and Indian War that had been awarded land in the Ohio. It was the way that our young republic after the American Revolution was going to get up on its own hind legs and march along with nations. And so the way to do that was to have good infrastructure. Safe buoys, safe lighthouses. One of the first acts of Congress was to establish a lighthouse board so that we could have safe waterways. Good navigation equals good trade. Good trade equals what? Good taxes so you can pay off your war debt. One of those big infrastructure projects was to get basically a cargo by boat from Norfolk to New Orleans. Now, you wouldn't do it on the same boat, and you ideally wouldn't even have to do it intermodally. You could just go from one type of boat to another. So you would sail, maybe in a schooner, probably a schooner, from Norfolk up to Richmond, and then transship your cargo onto a canal boat. Leave from Richmond and go up to Lynchburg, then up to Buchanan, then up to Covington, and up Dunlap Creek, and through Cape and Hart's Mountain to a 9-mile tunnel, and then down into the Greenbrier, Kanawha, Ohio, and ultimately Mississippi River. I don't think I missed too many places in there, but that was going to be the Great Central Waterline. And that was going to get iron, wheat, flour, tobacco, gosh, everything out of the breadbasket of Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley, the Tidewater, the Piedmont, and get it out to places like Richmond, Piedmont, and get it out Piedmont, and get it out Piedmont, and get it out to places like Richmond, where we're going to mill it. We were going to found it into cannons and locomotive cars. It was going to take 3 tunnels to do it. One little tunnel called the Mason Tunnel was completed, 170 feet long roughly. Railroad still runs through it. The second tunnel was going to be a little shy of 2,000 feet, and it was named the Marshall Tunnel for Chief Justice John Marshall. We all know him for his Supreme Court and his jurisprudence Piedmont, and get it out Piedmont, and get it out to places like Richmond, where we're going to mill it. We were going to found it into cannons and locomotive cars. It was going to take 3 tunnels to do it. One little tunnel called the Mason Tunnel was completed, 170 feet long roughly. Railroad still runs through it. The second tunnel was going to be a little shy of 2,000 feet, and it was named the Marshall Tunnel for Chief Justice John Marshall. We all know him for his Supreme Court and his jurisprudence, Marbury, Madison, all that business. But he was really, in my professional and personal heart, he was endeared to the canal concept. And he didn't just say, go do it. He was a man that went and did it and came back and told you how it can be done. And so he produced a report after having actually gone down the Greenbrier and Kanawha River by boat and walked over the mountains to do so. In 1813 said, here's not only how, but where we can do this. And so one of those tunnels was started in 1853. Took a little bit of time. These big projects take time. They finally started the tunnel and basically started augering in from one side of the mountain to the other. They're going to cut off about 5 miles of canal they didn't have to dig. That's why it's worth it, in other words. And they're going through, this is 580 million year old limestone. You would think after almost 600 million years you'd get yourself together, but this old stuff has been squished, pulled, stretched, banged, crushed, and that so many times it becomes very unpredictable. And so they had cave-in after cave-in. That meant additional money, additional time. And infrastructure, people that manage infrastructure projects don't like to hear those two words, additional money and additional time. The legislature kept bailing out the shareholding company. But in December of 1856, the money ran out for the very last time. And the Marshall Tunnel was left unfinished. You would have taken canal boats through here. This was the ledge that they left. It goes all the way 400 feet back behind me when I'm taking this picture. That's where the tow path would have gone for mules and horses to tow the boats through this 25-foot tall, roughly 23-foot wide tunnel. I got a call. You got to go see this thing. I didn't know what this thing was. I got into an email chain. You got to go see this thing. So Patrick and I went and saw this thing and saw 2 unfinished locks, an unfinished dam, 2 portions of unfinished tunnel, walked in there, and the minute I saw the intact footprints of the laborers from December of 1856, I was more than hooked. This is where boats were meant to go, so by gosh, we are meant to go here too. This is maritime if nothing. First time Jill did the above water or out of water excavations. She got to do what most terrestrial archaeologists lust after, which is use a vacuum rather than a trowel. And she's actually vacuuming out an area where there were a bunch of footprints there. Here's Jill and myself working. There were now the mud is almost like rock at this point, but you can see where boards had been laid down for muckers with wheelbarrows to get in with their little iron wheelbarrows to muck out the rock and the clay and all of the stuff. And that's actually an air shaft that at the time had collapsed and infilled with debris, part of their frustration of finance and time. It was never this light when we were working in there. All the pictures you see here are ones we did with all the lights on. We staged it, and then I was like, all right, stop wasting light, go back to work. We took 2.2 trillion laser points in the tunnel with 27 stations with a 3D laser scanner and a little shy of 11,000 photographs. And we can see the tunnel in its entirety. There's the big cut, and from there to there is a little under 600 feet. Engineer Edward Lorraine never got to see the tunnel like this. This is a very coarse version. If you go to Sketchfab, I can write it down afterwards or text you or whatever, you can actually fly through here. Last December we spent 5 days inside the tunnel. It's always t-shirt weather in there, long sleeve t-shirt weather in there, even in the winter, because you're so far in. It's 56 degrees up here year round. Doesn't matter. Geothermal heating, I guess. But we worked in there and were able to document the tunnel. These are just the basic scan points themselves, and then that's a screen capture from the Sketchfab tour. So you can go through and you can click on these points or just hit the right arrow, and it'll take you through and you can click on the little boxes. This one's short, but some of them I got verbose and put a bunch more stuff in, and you can go through where our ancestors hoped to get a canal boat through, so you could go from New Orleans to Norfolk and back again. Wow. We record mills because they're on and by water very frequently. That one collapsed 2 weeks after we finished recording that. We record bridge abutments. Again, is this crazy? I mean, no, but it's part of a big story. We don't just look at the thing. We study the thing in depth, and then we put the thing into context. And so this was a very important bridge crossing on the Appomattox River during the American Revolution, the Civil War, and this morning when I started driving here. I used the better one to the right. You asked about LiDAR. So doing a river study, we found, now I was looking at this creek here because it had been canalized during the 1840s and 50s. And we knew that the creek had jumped its banks. It used to run here, now it runs here, and we were following out some of these old colonial era dikes that kept the creek from flooding your cornfields. And we came across this thing. And I said, what is that thing? Here's a railroad, the Toex crossing. And here's a zoomed in image of it. This is the only medieval earthworks we have in Virginia. It was a fort that was never fought over, but a Prussian military engineer was hired by the Confederate government to build this fort. and boy, did he throw the book at it. I mean, he was a music teacher in Danville at the time, just lusting after getting some stars and bars on his shoulders. And he got the opportunity to be a military engineer, designed and had 3 forts built in Amelia. Not a single thing is same from one fort to the other, because he used the whole book between all 3. Hiding in plain sight, I went through public records, figured out who actually owns it. Turned out I went to high school with him. And then I introduced the correct fort people to come over and do their thing with that, but an unanticipated part of being on the water. Because we look beyond the water. These are places we've worked just in the past 8 months or so. I won't go into all the details about that. We just finished up one of these. Actually, it's still going this week. But looking at post-hurricane damage and change, not just damage, but change to our waterways, and seeing how that affects sites that we know about. Does it erase them? Does it damage them? Does it cover them? And also exposing new sites. In most of these areas that the survey is going on, no survey had been done, or the most recent survey was 30 or 40 years old. Recording fish dams, sluices. You can see the sluice right there. That's a channel, just like out here. You put your boat in take your boat through the channel. This is how people in the Bannister River got to market. Finding things that people are sure don't exist anymore. The amount of times I've been told, well, it used to be there. And boy, do we love to hear that. Because we take that as a challenge and we try to go find it. You know, the guy that Bill Kelso, Sir Dr. William Kelso, that located the James Fort, the triangular fort, was told, all of the authoritative experts on the topic had told him, Bill, that fort got washed in the river years ago. It's gone. Don't waste your time. And of course, he wasted his time for all the treasure and got the fort. We found this bypass dam, which the Confederates blew up on the Appomattox in 1865, trying to prevent any use being found in the town of Farmville. Looking in the rivers, finding whatever we can. Back to LiDAR here, bypass canals here, that you can see things that take us to where the boats are. In fact, this was a canal this guy owned 2,000 acres in Cumberland County, and he knew a little bit about the history that had gone on here, but didn't realize it was his family that had actually owned one of Virginia's earliest inland ports. And that's where they stored their bateaux off season. They probably sink them there to keep them from rotting. Now, I'll finish with a little Halloween story. If you want to read the whole thing, it just got published on our website, on our blog. It's on Facebook. But in 1869, Virginia was coming up on probably one of its most important elections in the state's history at the time. We just finished the Civil War, and the state, like all other formerly Confederate states, was required to have a brand spanking new constitution. So the election of 1869 was going to usher in that new constitution, or not, along with potentially a whole new government. All those carpet-bagging radical reconstructionists. I'm using period terms now. And sure, they did have pejorative, but all from the papers. This was the big tussle against the old order Virginia political establishment and whatever the new would be. The most important thing about that election, though, is who's going to get to vote for the very first time in that? Free black men. So that changes the dynamic of the election. No one had ever had to figure out in that demographic of an electoral math. The party that wanted to keep the old ways, in many ways, figured we've got to get some of that vote. Mathematically, we've got to have some of that vote. So a guy named Gilbert Walker ran for governor, and one of his best buddies and co-conspirators in the election was a guy named Colonel James Reed Branch. Branch was from Prince George County, but had moved to Richmond. His father was big in finance. They were bankers. He'd been an artillerist during the Civil War, but he didn't have a pre-war political record, so he was kind of clean. And so came out, and 4 days before the election, on this island behind you here in downtown Richmond, then called Barbecue or Kitchen Island, depending on which year you're looking at, there was a chain bridge that connected the two islands. You would go out, anybody know where Mayo's Bridge is in downtown Richmond? It's about to be replaced. It's kind of the idea, there was all that stuff there. I want a shuffleboard parlor. So the Colored Men for Walker was a group that had been established to support Gilbert Walker's campaign. They were the ones that were there at the barbecue. It was billed as open to the public, but it was kind of a ticketed affair. And police officer Kirkham stood at this side of the bridge, our side of the bridge, and said, nope, you gotta have a pass for the event. A crowd about twice as big as what's in this room right now assembled, and with their growing assembly, so did their temper, because they'd read that this was open. And they wanted to get over there. It was free lunch, music, it was a good time, and they were also politically engaged now and wanted to express that enfranchisement. I think it was probably scripted a little bit. Branch on the island heard that these people couldn't get across, and so he walked halfway across the bridge and told Officer Kirkham, stand aside, and he uttered his last 3 mortal words. He said, tell them to come on, dinner's almost ready, there's plenty for everyone. And when he said that, the 2 big timbers holding up the bridge on the Vauxhall Island side creaked, cracked, the bridge shook, people were flooding over to get onto it, over exceeded the bridge's weight, and the big old wrought iron chain snapped and down went everybody into the James River. Colonel Branch's head rose 2 or 3 times, face bloody, the chain had stunned him across the back, caught in the wreckage. 2 people, poor Officer Kirkham died immediately. He was 31 years old, had 2 kids at home, lived on 7th Street. And so the body of James Branch was found and dragged out of the river. And in pure Victorian fashion, there were only 2 doctors there that stared at him before a kid walked up and said, he's got a pulse. His heart's still beating. And so they took remunerative effects. I don't have my pocket knife on me. They took and made an incision on his scalp to revive him. The poor boy just probably needed to be pumped out. But he died there on the table. And of course that changed. The election went about as how people thought it would. But the largest funeral since the death of Stonewall Jackson was held in St. Paul's Episcopal on Gray Street. And in the funeral, flagstones in the vestibule gave way and 20 people plummeted into the church's basement. The funeral cortege to Hollywood was followed by members of the African American community that were disaffected with members of their community going for Governor Walker. And so they threw stones at the funeral cortege going to Hollywood. What a mess. I took a friend of mine who, in various ways, works in the Senate to work with me one day. And we were there to do some other stuff. And I jokingly said to him, I said, you work in the Senate. Let's go try to find this place we won't be able to find. And so we went over between Vauxhalls and Barbecue Island. Now it's called Bailey's Island. We looked around. I looked at the sycamore, and sycamores have a way of liking to find something to grow on, just like a barnacle. Well, here's some stones. We went in a little bit closer. Those stones were the loose abutment, about 12 or so feet wide. We knew the bridge was 5 feet wide. Had a big chain suspension, just like the Golden Gate has wires. We went and we stood right about here. We're both real proud of ourselves now because we think we might have actually found the abutment for the old Vauxhall chain bridge. We looked up at the same time. We looked down and we found this little piece of plate. We looked up and there's the chain. A recent flood had scoured, really scoured this bank. And he looks at me and I told him, I swear I didn't stage this. I swear I didn't stage this. He goes, how can you tell that's old chain? I said, it's old wrought chain. You know, it doesn't have those little things in the middle that modern electro-welded chain has. It's not all this stuff. And so both of us were just tickled about that. So I just wrote a blog article about it. If you want all the gory details about who lost their thumb and all that, you can look on our blog and get a good old story. But pretty interesting part of getting into Virginia, maritime history, politics. We live in a wonderful state. Chincoteague is one end of it. And I've been in the mountains last week working on that. But as you can see, we jump around from lily pad to lily pad a lot, but we try to get in with depth and then most importantly, share that. So I appreciate you all allowing me to share our little stories tonight and come back out to Chincoteague. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can either email me, call me, or I'll be vulnerable now.
When you're digging in that long, long tunnel, are you concerned about having again still?
We always have a safety meeting to discuss these things, and we don't want to just dart in there
So you're still
into
not
the trap. I've discussed that environment with cavers, search and rescue, folks that know geology better than I do. And the prevailing thought, which is the thought I rely on, is that whatever's going to happen in there has happened. And they said we've had numerous earthquakes which have shook this and all that, so the concept is that it's pretty well. Most of the tunnel that was completed there, a big part of tunneling I learned, because I didn't know anything about tunneling, but trying to get a canal through a mountain had my immediate interest, or put a boat through a mountain. But one of the things you do when you're tunneling through rock is you have crews that go through and literally find anything that's loose and knock it down. So most of that has been made fairly safe by that. But yeah, it was quite a fascinating. We were actually just up there last week, going for the very last segment of the tunnel that we had not been in, which required something very akin to caving. But I will tell you this: I'm not ready to release. If you want to learn about that, I'll see you in Fincastle next Friday night at 6. What we were able to see there, I think, has only been seen by 1 or 2 other people since January of 1856. It's called the Marshall Tunnel. Yeah, after Chief Justice John Marshall. Yeah. Yeah, and I've written a little bit about it online. It's still kind of new research, so don't have everything ready to publish yet. So y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.
And be careful on Friday the 13th. It begins in just a few hours. There's no idea there was all that stuff there. I want a shuffleboard.